Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Build and Scale Boldly podcast for purpose-driven women entrepreneurs who want to grow their businesses with more profit, more ease, and more impact. I'm your host, Dr. Leti Alto, physician, entrepreneur, and real estate investor. And today we're going to be talking about a mindset principle that has completely shaped the way that I show up in life, business, and relationships. And that is a simple sentence: whatever you feed grows. So if you've ever felt like your thoughts are working against you, or maybe you're stuck in cycles of fear or judgment or self-doubt, know you're not alone and know that lots of us have gotten into these spaces in our lives. But there really is a way to shift out of that, and it starts with noticing what you're feeding your mind every single day. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about tools and practices that really work. So here's the thing. I am a huge proponent of mindset work, and you probably already know that if you've listened to this podcast. And most months I actually attend usually about one mindset-focused conference, and I'm constantly reading books on mindset and expanding my perspective, deepening my tools, talking to people about mindset. Why? Because your mindset is really your operating system, and it completely controls the way you see the world. It's almost like a filter, and when you work on your mindset, everything that's happening around you has a totally different meaning. And so when you get the mindset tools and practices that I'm going to talk about today, you just have a different experience of life because you're feeding your brain differently. And so if you're running on fear or worry or scarcity, everything that you see and every experience you have is impacted by that lens that you're putting on it. And there's this quote that I wanted to really focus this podcast on, which is whatever you feed grows. And I found that to be true over and over and over again. And whether it's a thought, whether it's a belief, or whether it's a story you tell yourself, whatever you're feeding yourself constantly, you're going to get more of it, and you're going to create more of it all around you. Now, one of the things you might be thinking is, well, my brain offers these unhelpful thoughts all the time. And what am I supposed to do with that? Well, that's really normal. I think your brain is always looking for what's wrong. And especially if you're a physician listening to this, we are trained to look for what's wrong, and we're trained to look for worst case scenarios all the time. And our brain is it's wired for survival, which means it's constantly scanning for what can go wrong, what might fail, where you're not safe. And this isn't a bad thing. This was really a necessary thing for humans to be able to thrive for many, many years. Even now, sometimes it's important that your brain recognizes when something's unsafe or when you really need to change your circumstances dramatically because something's about to go really wrong. But most of the time, your brain offers these thoughts that are not so helpful, and you have to learn how to manage those thoughts, because ultimately your brain will often feed you fear. And if you live in that fear, it will grow. And so you have some of this happening naturally and just by what your brain is doing. But sometimes you also maybe get a family that lives that way as well, or you spend a lot of time in groups that think that way. And so it's not just your natural inclination with your brain, but it's actually what you're getting fed culturally or from the people around you. And then all of a sudden, you are always looking for what's wrong, and you're always feeling negative, and you're feeling fearful, or you are feeling uncertain. And you can get this sense that reality is that way, right? That everyone around you is like that. Every interaction is that way. And when you start to interpret life this way, then you don't feel good, right? You feel fearful. You feel angry. You feel resentful. You feel disconnected. And it just it feeds itself. And it can be a cycle that you get into where your thoughts create your reality, and your reality feeds back to your thoughts. And you're just caught in this cycle of really negative feelings and not feeling great. So just to give you an example, there's this concept of thought stacking, right? And stacking experiences and noticing what's really good that's going on or really bad that's going on and stacking those. And so years ago, I was actually at a relationship conference, and I saw an example of this that I wanted to explain to you guys. So what happened was they had an intervention between a couple, and the woman was standing up, and she was describing that her therapist actually had her keep a journal of all the times that her husband, was quote unquote gaslighting her or having negative interactions with her. And so she was actually keeping a journal and stacking all the negative experiences that she had with her husband, right? And so if you think about that, what do you think her experience that she thought about and she felt most of the time was with her husband? Well, it's probably negative, right? Because what she was paying attention to and what she was stacking and what she was spending her time thinking about and focusing on were those negative interactions, right? She wasn't keeping a journal of all the times that he was thoughtful or kind or showed up and contributed or any of that stuff. She was keeping a journal of the times that he disappointed her or that he was angry or didn't act in the way that she wanted. And if you believe this, whatever you feed grows. She's actually feeding herself negative experiences all day long and reliving those negative experiences. And so that's called stacking. And when you think about it, most of us have a tendency of doing that, right? And even as business owners, many of us have a tendency to do this. And I definitely have done this in the past and still catch myself doing this sometimes, where you're always looking for what's wrong. You're looking for where things are messed up or where they aren't as good as you would wish them to be in your business. And that actually leads you to focusing and experiencing your business as a really negative thing. And perhaps your employees or your team members or your contractors or your partners, as you're experiencing what you perceive to be negative most of the time in your interactions with them. And that really creates an unpleasant reality within your business. And again, naturally, our brains want to do this. Naturally, many of us have been raised culturally or within our families to want to do this. But this stacking and always looking what's wrong creates a really unpleasant interactions between us and the people in our business, and also creates an unpleasant reality for us to live in, because it really is just thought stacking in a very negative way. Now, let's go back to that woman at the conference, right? She's keeping this journal of all these negative experiences with her husband. Do you think her relationship got better or do you think it got worse? Right. It got worse, right? Because she's looking at what's wrong. Same way in your business. If you're thought stacking all these experiences that you have with what's wrong in your company or wrong in your team, your whole experience and your approach to your team is going to get worse and things are not going to get better. Now, this doesn't mean that you are a positive thinker and you ignore all the things that are going around you. No, you need to look at reality of the things that can be done better. Now, this doesn't mean that you walk around with blindfolds on your eyes, right? Not looking at anything that's going on that could be done better, right? And not ignoring mistakes. But it does mean that you want to stack positive so that you live more of your life feeling good and in an appreciation for all the good that's around you, because what's wrong is always available and so is what's right. And what you want to do is your brain and your culture is going to have you want to spend more time in what's wrong, and you want to be actually actively working to spend more time in what's going right. So that's really positive stacking. And so how can you do this? Well, you can stack gratitude. Right? Not many of us actually do this in practice, where we sit down every day and just write down 5 things you're grateful for, right? Or focus when people show up their best selves. Focus on recognizing when people really put care into things. Focus on where your team member does show up and recognize another person or do something right. Call it out. Recognition is so important within teams to help people be seen and be appreciated and feel like they're part of a movement. Recognize the time that your spouse supports you during the day, right? And remember that, and also maybe recognize that out loud to them. And the truth is, we want all to build a life and a business and relationships that feel joyful, that feel energized, that feel aligned. But you really need to be intentional about what you feed your mind, because your mind, again, will have a tendency to go with what's wrong and not with what's right. And so you need to be intentional and make that choice and manage your mind and pay attention to all the good and to stack that good over and over and over again. So it's a decision you make every single day to shift, pay attention to what's great and put more emphasis on it and spend more of your time thinking about that than looking for what's wrong. Okay, so a couple more ideas about how you can practice this daily and maybe some tools that you could use. So number one is you could start a gratitude practice. You can do this multiple times a day. My husband's actually really a pro at this. He does this in the morning. He does this during the day. If he starts to feel anxious or starts to feel worried or scared or angry, that's when he goes right to that gratitude practice and starts to see what's right, not just what's wrong. Another one is to recognize and stop unhelpful thought loops. So a great way to do this is to change your state. I think going for a walk is really, really, really helpful to me, to get out into nature, listening to good music. spending 5 minutes just to take a break, get a coffee, spend some time with your kid, even working out, just kind of shifting your feelings at that moment, moving your body, that can help a lot with changing your state and then getting you out of those thought loops. And then another thing that's been really helpful for me when I start to think all these negative things is to ask myself how this is life happening for me, because that just totally shifts your mind from looking at what's wrong to saying, okay, there's something great here. Let me look for it, or let me look to make it great. And it's just a different way of looking at exactly the same situation and looking for the upside in it, really is what it's about. And so it's not even changing the external circumstances. It's changing your internal circumstances by looking at what is going on with a totally different perspective. And then lastly, you should celebrate tiny wins, because when you celebrate, you kind of reinforce gratitude, you reinforce what's good. And that positive stacking, right? Stacking really great experiences by celebrating them and by really making them special and recognizing them and taking that time. This is all about intentional focus, right? About choosing your thoughts and choosing what you focus on and spending more time with feelings that help support you living a joyful life, feeding your mind gratefulness, feeding your mind love, those types of things. That's what's ultimately going to help you just live in joy and live in happiness, which is what I ultimately think most of us really want to spend most of our time in life. Now, if this podcast has you wanting to go deeper into mindset work, I have to tell you, again, I do a ton of mindset work. I do a ton of reading. And so I created a free download of my favorite books that have transformed the ways that I think, the way I lead, the way I show up, the way I do business. And there are several powerful mindset books in this download that I would recommend over and over again. So you definitely want to check it out. It's at www.beyara.com/books. So that's www.beyara.com/books. Okay, so getting towards the end of the podcast, my reflection question for you is, what's one thought or belief you've been feeling lately, that you've been feeling repetitively, that you would like to shift? And how would you go feed yourself and your mind a more empowering thought instead? If you've had a pattern that you're falling into a certain feeling or a certain thought, what could you feed your mind instead of that thought? Do you want to, go to gratitude? Do you want to, interrupt that thought by going and changing your physiology, going on a walk, listening to music? Or do you want to say, how is this life happening for me? Those are just a couple of the tools that we've taught you here. And what could grow if you focused on stacking the positive just a little bit more this week? Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the Build and Scale Boldly podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you know another bold entrepreneurial woman who could benefit from hearing this episode, make sure to forward along to her. Okay, as always, keep dreaming big, keep leading boldly, and most of all, keep building a business and life that you love. We'll see you next time.